Sam Altman's dead and has been replaced by an LLM.
I don't think this is solvable. I don't think this is a solvable problem.
In some sense, ChatGPT is already more powerful than any human who has ever lived. In some sense, so is my lawnmower. That thing can cut grass like no man with a machete ever.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And on this week, we're going to talk about AI in the workplace. There's some surprising new headlines and data that talks about how AI is changing work. We're also going to talk about Meta and AI. They're doing some massive multi-$100 million moves. We're going to tell you what they are and what they mean. And then finally, we're going to talk about Sam Altman's post about the gentle singularity, where he paints a picture of what the future is going to look like. We're going to ask the question, is he right, or is he just trying to lull us into a false sense of security?
We've got a few big themes we wanted to cover. So we're going to go through each of these themes, and under each theme, there are a few different stories that we're going to discuss in that context. The first of these themes is AI in the workplace. In the last 2 years, AI use in the workplace has nearly doubled. So this is a Gallup poll that shows that since 2023, we now have 40% of employees in the US who are using AI in the workplace, and we have nearly 10% using it daily. This is particularly noticeable amongst white-collar workers, which is not surprising, and leaders in technology, professional services, and finance. This is happening despite the fact that people still have fairly limited AI literacy, and also, and the report notes this, that many organizations haven't established clear guidelines for AI implementation or use. So I've actually come across this, Chris. A lot of companies, especially bigger companies or government, just say, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT at work. And despite that, Chris, 40% of all employees in the US are using AI at work, at least sometimes, which to me is an incredible degree of adoption for such a new technology. What do you think?
I mean, the first thing that strikes me about this is, especially, useful for operators and founders and product managers out there, is this idea that you don't have to build enterprise tooling in order for enterprises to adopt your stuff. If you build something compelling and exciting and useful, people will just adopt it. And, this is, I've advised companies and founders on this all day long, where they're just trying to build all of these tools to get the IT department or procurement the administrators of a school to buy their thing. And I keep saying, focus on the end user. And AI and AI tools are like the ultimate expression of this, right? If you build something as compelling as AI or AI tooling, guess what? 30, 40, 50% of people within a couple of years are going to be using the thing, whether their company, their government, their institution likes it or not. And the other thing I want to point out is, some percentage of these are using it daily, so that seems like a lot. But are they using it well? You mentioned AI literacy. I would argue, or I would suspect, that the quality of the execution is still pretty nascent. It's still like, am I using all the best tools? Am I using the prompts exactly the right way? Have I discovered the video generation stuff of Google Flow? I don't know. I think a lot of those people are probably just using ChatGPT or Copilot. And so as the maturity of this adoption increases, I think we'll continue to see huge productivity gains, disruption, innovation, excitement, to say nothing of the improvement of the tools themselves. A recent study from Oxford explained the interaction of people, particularly people in healthcare, and their use of AI to either make diagnoses more accurate or less accurate, depending on who's involved. The first takeaway here is that LLMs excel in lab scenarios, but humans struggle in live interactions. So LLMs like GPT-4o, Llama 3, and so on, they accurately diagnose conditions some 94.9% of the time in controlled textbook-style scenarios. However, when participants used those same LLMs to self-diagnose, their success rate plummeted to 34.5%. So in a lab, in controlled textbook scenarios, it was able to diagnose 94.9% of the time, super accurate. But when people are just using it without controlled conditions, that plummets to 34%. It's a huge delta. AI assistance underperforms compared to unaided users. So the control group who diagnosed on their own using methods like Google and stuff surpassed AI-assisted group at 47% correct versus 34%. So people trying to use AI were getting a worse result at self-diagnosis than just like using Dr. Google. The human-AI connection breakdown, the human connection, the communication breakdown disrupts the accuracy. So in many cases, users fail to provide sufficient detail, and the models don't follow up or probe deeper. They just sort of like confidently just, hallucinate their way to an answer. Simulated users aren't the same as real ones. That's the other takeaway of the study, which is that when the LLM interacts with simulated patients, the accuracy rose to 60 or 61%. And lab benchmarks don't predict real-world performance, obviously, because when you're in the lab, the performance is way, way better than everyday users. So this is really interesting, Yaniv. What they're saying is the LLMs are really, really smart, but it's the human LLM interface that's breaking down because humans aren't giving the LLMs accurate information. I got to say, I've experienced this myself. I mentioned this on the show before. I was trying to do something, solve a very complicated question with lots of context and details and technicalities, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was bumbling my way through it, and the LLM was just giving me dead end after dead end, bad information after bad information, both because of my bad context as well as its out of date world information. Like it was not up to date on the latest laws and the latest quirks of history. And so, it was just a disaster all the way around. So this doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me at all either. So the real comparison here is, I think the researchers compared it to a game of telephone, broken telephone, right? Where either the LLM was fed a hypothetical scenario, right? This is what happened. And that's when it got the 94.9% accuracy. Or a human read the hypothetical scenario and then kind of interacted with the LLM to get the diagnosis. And of course, the human is very selective in what information it chooses to provide and maybe, leads the LLM down a garden path, and the LLM confidently gives the wrong answer. And so I do think this is really fascinating, not surprising. Hallucinations are not a solved problem, right? LLMs will always confidently tell you something, even if it's the wrong thing. But also, this really does speak to prompting skill. It really does, right? Which is, in order to get the most out of LLMs, you need to understand the sort of limitations they will have, and therefore prompt them in a particular way. And although I've already said we don't love the term prompt engineering, the art of prompting is as relevant or even more relevant than it used to be as these tools get more powerful. The difference between someone who can prompt them effectively and someone who cannot, in terms of what they achieve, gets more and more profound. And so, I think this is just fascinating, right? Which is like, researchers are quick to say, well, you shouldn't blame the humans, right? It's if the tool fails, then it's the fault of the tool. And to a certain extent, that's true. And there's a great level of room for product development and research on LLMs that are better at interacting with humans, right? Better at getting the information they need out of humans. And of course, if we want to use them in a medical case as a doctor, then they have to get better. They have to have a better bedside manner. They have to become better diagnosticians with human patients. But overall, if you're in the workplace and you're thinking, I want to get more out of LLMs, you need to learn how are they good and where do they fall over so you know how to prompt them well. Now, we have an episode coming out soon all about the art of prompting, but also, to me, the best way to figure out what works well is to just spend a hell of a lot of time using these tools. And you will find that through that iterative process, you will learn what works well and what tends to get the LLM off on the wrong track.
I think this is fascinating because it seems like the risk to alignment is the built-in amiability and agreeableness of these models. So they're trying to make them friendly and amiable and agreeable and sort of do what they're told as a form of alignment, as a form of usefulness. But in doing so, these LLMs are not asking first principles questions. They're not challenging the assumptions. They're not using intuition to go, hang on, I think you're asking the wrong question, or I don't have enough context for you to give you this constructive answer. And so I think this is actually a weirdly counterintuitive alignment problem. And I think also, Yaniv, as we touched on in the last show, or one of the recent shows, is people are terrible at prompting in general, prompting each other, much less prompting an LLM. They're terrible at sharing the right context, and they're terrible at asking the right questions. And I don't think this is solvable. I don't think this is a solvable problem unless the LLMs become really, really good at developing intuition and challenging questions and tasks from first principles. The LLMs have to help us because we suck at this. Most people suck at this most of the time. And so, the LLM has to literally stop and go, hang on a second, Chris. I don't have enough context for this. You seem to be missing a bunch of important, data here. And I think you're asking me the wrong question. I need you to tell me these 5 additional things. And I need you to, and I think the question you're really asking is this.
I think that's right. And, again, to tease this upcoming episode with Jonathan Mast, who actually has a community of 500,000 people who follow his tips on prompting. One of the things he says in his prompting framework is to make sure always at the end to tell the LLM to ask any questions it might have to clarify it. And it's amazing because if you actually prompt it to ask you questions, it will. And yeah, Chris, it could be a question of alignment or even a sort of implied interface design that the LLM is too eager to jump straight to giving you an answer. Even if it can improve the quality of its own answer by asking you for additional information, it has that capability, but you need to ask it to use that capability. And when you have that back and forth conversation where you say, hey, don't just give me an answer, tell me what you need to know first, you do get a much better quality of result. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think there's an opportunity for a product that is much more in that direction of saying, hey, our job here is to really have a conversation with you, right? Not be the sort of question answering tool, but to actually have a back and forth exploration of the knowledge space until you can really get the result that you want.
Deep research does a version of this. It asks you once to provide more context, but the questions it asks tend to be relatively inane and not that helpful. And I think you're right. It needs to almost have a conversation with you to gather multiple degrees of context to pressure test all of your assumptions and presuppositions. And in some cases, it needs to even challenge you on what you think you want to know. I've been really disappointed with this one particular challenge I've been thinking through with my ChatGPT and how poor a job it does at this. And worse, how poor a job it does at memory. So, I've updated my memory. I'm working within a project. I have previous conversation threads, and all of this is supposed to maintain context. And it just shits the bed. The context evaporates, not just between multiple chats or between multiple chats in a project, but sometimes within the same chat. And I think this is a hidden limitation when you start using these things for really deep analysis and strategy.
Yeah, look, I've been using LLMs for coding the last few weeks. I've been diving deep into the world of AI-based coding, and I'm seeing a lot of those same problems, right? Context management is actually really difficult. And I think for both of us, Chris, like you have this roller coaster where you see the immense promise of AI and its potential and it's the magical things it can do, and you get very excited. You go into it, and although all the promise is there, the limitations become very apparent and they can become frustrating. Then you learn how to work with the limitations and through the limitations. But definitely, it's a learning journey, right? And in a sense, the AIs are there to, you nearly have to go through a process of learning how they think, because they're not going to learn how you think, right? It's your job. You are the agent here, right? In a very real sense, to say, okay, I need to understand how to use this very complex tool that doesn't have clear affordances. We've had this conversation before. It's like, it's actually not clear what its mental model is. And the only way to really develop an understanding is to use it a lot.
Yeah. And then we're back to square one. So instead of having to learn UI and UX, you're having to learn the mental model of a sort of dumb, overly agreeable coworker. And so, yeah, I think these models need to get much smarter, or maybe we've jumped the gun here and there's
the problem isn't smartness. The problem lies elsewhere.
No, it's intuition. It's intuition, and it's also, I think, our reinforcement training. They're being trained to be way, way too agreeable. They need to be much more skeptical and much more based on first principles. I've stolen a massive customized instructions set from Andrew Chen off LinkedIn. He posted on LinkedIn, and he has 20 really interesting instructions for his personalized instructions. And it's really cool. It's like, use maximum tokens, think as deeply as you can, do any research on the web before you answer, prompt me for key follow-up questions, provide the pros and cons of anything I'm asking about. It's like really, really powerful. And I've added to it, always think from first principles and challenge any implicit assumptions that might be wrong. And it still fails to do it 99% of the time, despite me having these incredible custom instructions in ChatGPT. So it's tough. Talking about context, in your work environment, most of your context, or a lot of context, lives inside Slack. And the next topic we wanted to talk about was actually Slack updating their policies, their API policies, to block bots from accessing your full chat history and corporate knowledge inside Slack for the purposes of AI context. They're in essence blocking third-party full context AI bots to operate over your Slack data, presumably because they want to own that category of bot for themselves. And so it's a very interesting move here from Slack and from Salesforce, their parent company.
And of course, what it reminds me of, Chris, is for those of you who've been in the scene long enough, is what Facebook did back in the day with their platform, where they created a very open API and platform, invited lots of third-party developers into that platform, said, you can do Farmville and all these different apps, and you can get people's social graph and everything. They watched, they learned, and then they basically threw everyone off their platform and said, this data that we were sort of making available and representing as belonging to the user, it doesn't really belong to the user. It belongs to us, Facebook, right? The user's social graph, it belongs to us. And so you don't get to play there anymore. You don't get to build your business on top of Facebook's social graph anymore. And it's Slack doing the same thing. It's saying these workplace communications, you might think it belongs to the workplace, to the person paying the subscription fee, and that they can invite bots in to do whatever they like. But not really. No, this data belongs to us. It belongs to Slack. And we want to monetize this data in this context because, as we've discussed in the last few episodes, Chris, context data is kind of the new fundamental building block. That is the fuel that powers AI, right? And so there's this game to get as much proprietary data as you can so you can build products on top of it. And Slack have no intention of making this great source of very valuable company data available to a whole bunch of potential competitors.
Yeah, the word and the concept of context is one of my obsessions. I used to have a podcast called Context Matters, and my company is called Context Corp. Context is really one of the essential pillars that attenuate your experience and your understanding of the world. And, as we've been saying throughout this episode and throughout previous episodes, LLMs live or die by their context that you give them and their capability to support large context windows over time. And Slack here is essentially shutting or quickly closing the door on making that conversational context from your corporation available to third-party bots. And yet, as everyone knows who's been listening to the show for any length of time, I have come from a developer platform background and around APIs and ecosystems. And platform risk is real. The people who run these platforms, who build these platforms, often are very well-meaning. They have this open ecosystem mindset, but sometimes they leave, or they're pushed aside, or they're subject to the whims of people higher up in the org, or the winds of fortune change. And many of these well-meaning people, including myself at Uber, Amir, who helped build the Slack platform, a friend of the pod, is on a lot of the shows. We all had good intentions. I'm sure the Facebook guys had good intentions. I know some of them, Josh Ellman over there and others. But yeah, as soon as the executives get involved and the winds change, it's like, shuttle that shit down. We're taking over.
So this is our topic on AI in the workplace. And if you see, there's an interesting arc here, Chris, which I think is going to play out over the next few years, right? We have the increasing use of AI in the workspace. And, we're both AI optimists. I think it's fair to say we think this technology has huge potential. But then we see a couple of the things that might stand in the way of getting the full value from this technology. And one of them is this human AI interface and actually being able to get the most value out of this tool when real people are in the mix. And then the other is this siloing of data that is going to happen because of corporate and other interests, right? Where AI is going to be at its most powerful when all the data is in one place and you can get this giant super brain that has all of that context and can think across all of it. But companies like Slack, which is owned by Salesforce, and many others are not going to allow that to happen because it is in their interests to keep that silo to themselves. And so it's going to be an interesting back and forth. And I think the real world never plays out like the ideal. I think there's still going to be a lot of value, but the idea of having all of your data in one place is probably not going to play out the way we hoped it would.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts on AI and the workplace. Jump in the comments and let us know how you're seeing AI used in your workplace and whether it's really helping you. Now, speaking of data being key here, let's move on to our next big topic. And the first headline within that topic includes data at its core. So we want to talk about a couple of stories related to Meta and AI. And the first one is about Meta investing in Scale AI. So Meta has taken a bold step in the arms race, acquiring a massive 49% stake in Scale AI at a stunning valuation of nearly $30 billion. As part of the deal, Scale's 28-year-old founder and CEO, Alexander Wang, is joining Meta's new Superintelligence division, reporting directly to Mark Zuckerberg. And Scale AI will continue operating independently, with its chief strategy officer stepping in as interim CEO, and shareholders receiving a huge payout. And this deal has caused shockwaves. Google has dropped Scale AI as a vendor, and rivals like Handshake and Turing are rushing to fill the vacuum. And for Meta, this is a strategic power play, right? Part of a $68 billion AI investment push in 2025, aiming at catching up with OpenAI and Google in the generative AI space. Now, if you don't know what Scale AI does, just very quickly, this company has come out of nowhere. It's been created by a couple of relatively young people here. Its job is to basically help companies that are creating models to solve their data problem by generating synthetic data, lookalike data, variations on their data, to basically take, let's say, X amount of data and turn it into X times 10, so that you can train your models on fractions of real-world data that has been extrapolated by Scale AI's systems. So it's really a methodology for training, tuning, and scaling up generative models. And they were an independent arms provider, tools provider to many players in the space. And Meta has said, thank you very much. We'll buy 49% of that and take a key strategic position in the ecosystem.
Well, here's the interesting thing, Chris, and this is an analysis I've heard on other podcasts, but I strongly agree with it, which is, why did Facebook buy 49% of this company? Exactly 49%, right? And what is actually happening here is, this is a backdoor acquisition. It's an acquisition in all but name, because Facebook cannot acquire this company, because that would create a huge amount of regulatory scrutiny, and it probably wouldn't pass. So what they've done is they've said, we're going to buy 49% of the company at an absurd valuation, such that the amount of money paid for that 49% is probably equal to the full value of the company. We're going to take the CEO, and thank you, he now works for Facebook, thank you very much. And the rest of the company, well, we don't really care, right? And of course, the first thing you see is Google, which is actually Scale AI's #1 biggest customer, saying, well, we don't really like the idea of having such a strong dependency on a company that is now effectively controlled by one of our biggest competitors. So for Scale AI as a company, this is a terrible deal, right? Because, they just have cut off most of their customer base. But that's not what this is about. This is about Facebook, Meta, spending up big to take a strategic position to effectively buy up this technology, take it out of the hands of its competitors. And importantly, we talked about OpenAI's massive acquihire of Johnny Ive just a couple of weeks ago. And in a sense, there's a whole lot of tech that comes here, but also this is an acquihire of the top talent in the space. It shows a level of boldness and arguably also a level of desperation from Meta, who seem to be maybe just falling away a little bit from the absolute frontier of what is happening in AI these days.
I think this is really, really interesting, because we've seen this happen a couple of times before in the AI era, especially, of these major hyperscalers in acquiring, in all but name, these smaller companies and basically strip mining them. I want to bring this back to my meta trend that I've mentioned a few times on the show, this idea of unbundling. We're sort of unbundling the concept of acquisition from corporate takeover. So the corporate entity, the institution that is known as Scale AI, is not being acquired, but its assets, its core value is being acquired, is being ripped out of the heart of it. And it's this kind of Machiavellian, or not even Machiavellian, it's this kind of like underhanded way to get around the regulations and the law. And we're sort of unbundling the incentives of the corporate structure of the company from the incentives of the shareholders within that company. And this is a really nasty way of getting around the kind of the regulations, the rules, the checks and balances in the country. And I don't know how long this is going to be allowed to continue. And if it weren't for a completely potato governance structure in the US that is captured by money and corrupted by cults of personality, one would imagine that they would pass laws to cover off for this kind of stuff. I will point out, for all of my criticisms sometimes, my loving criticisms of Australia, it doesn't allow this kind of shit to happen, or it doesn't allow it to happen for very long. Instead of passing laws that say something like, in a divorce, any money in your name shall be put into community property and then divided out, it just says stuff like, whatever you have functional control over is yours, and we will evaluate you based on that. And so I imagine if Australia doesn't have this already, it would do something in this case of something like, anything that approximates an acquisition, whether it is technically an acquisition or not, counts as an acquisition, and you may not do such a thing unless you are, subject to these acquisition laws. But the US doesn't do this kind of shit. They build in loopholes and carve outs so that the lawyers can have a field day and the people can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, we'll see how this plays out. But yes, I don't think this is really unbundling, Chris. It is, as you say, it's just a loophole that clever lawyers have found and hopefully will be closed soon. But in the meantime, that's what's happening. But maybe it's a good way to come to the second part of this story, which is these stories coming out of multiple places, including from Sam Altman himself, saying that Meta has been trying to poach top AI researchers from other labs, including OpenAI, for eye-watering amounts of money. According to these reports, Mark Zuckerberg has been contacting these top folks themselves and making cash offers as high as, wait for this, $100 million, right? So these are the sorts of offers that we used to top pro footballers and basketballers getting. This is now what the top AI researchers in the world are able to command from places like Meta in their strong effort to catch up. And the crazy thing is, apparently, all of these people who have been getting these crazy offers have turned them down. I think that's just even more exceptional to say that there is so much money that these researchers can basically choose where they want to work based on where the best work is happening. And there is no amount of money that can really prize them away because a place like OpenAI can easily pay them a similar amount. So I don't think we have ever seen employees who are not star sports people paid anywhere near this much, probably in history. This is more than investment bankers. This is more than top traders make. It's just an incredible time. And again, points to the stakes here and points again to this fact that Meta is spending up big, but is no longer really at the front of this race.
So it's interesting, I'm not sure that the reason these people are staying is because OpenAI can match these offers or that these people are getting anywhere near the equivalent amount of money. Apparently, Sam Altman is saying that none of his best people have left and attributing it to OpenAI's mission and culture, not financial competition. So at least publicly, or at least reportedly, the question here is not, wow, OpenAI, these people can command so much money and OpenAI is able to match it or willing to match it. What the story is here is that people want to work for Sam Altman and OpenAI $100 million more, or $80 million more than they want to work for Mark Zuckerberg and Meta when it comes to AI. Assuming they paid something like $20 million in total comp. I don't know how much of that is true. Is there some quiet side deal, some deal that hasn't been reported? Is there more to the story behind the scenes? I don't know, but if it's true that these guys are turning $100 million offers down to keep working at OpenAI because we like OpenAI, that is one hell of a culture, a mission, employee fit, et cetera, one that everyone would be extremely envious of.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I think they're at least getting paid in the same realm. So if Facebook offers them 100 million, maybe they're getting 70 million at OpenAI. But the truth is, money talks, and there are very few people in the world, they do exist, of course. There are very few people in the world who do not have their price, right? At which they would say, you know what? I like working at OpenAI. It has a great culture, but those people are offering me $100 million. There are very few people. And it does remind me, when Facebook was a young whippersnapper and I was working at Google, there was a period where Facebook was aggressively recruiting top software engineers from Google. And we're not talking about the same quantums of money here. We're in the hundreds of thousands, the hundreds of millions. But what happened is they were very aggressively going after Google's engineers. This is pre-IPO. They're saying, hey, come work at Facebook, you'll make a mozza. And Google started basically inoculating itself. Basically, they had an unofficial policy that if you got an offer from Facebook, they would do a counter offer that was double.
Yes.
So you could basically go to Facebook, get your job offer, come back to your manager at Google and say, here's my offer from Facebook, and you would just get your salary doubled. And so, when things really heat up for top talent and there is a lot of money, then these companies start doing crazy things. And although the volumes of the numbers are bigger than they've ever been before, these are also companies that have raised amounts of capital that have never been seen before. So it's not surprising that in a very limited field of top AI researchers and top AI engineers, they're like, all right, we just raised $50 billion. Yes, we're going to put $1 billion of that towards making sure that our top people stay here. That seems like a rational decision in that context.
This reminds me of an email that Steve Jobs once sent. I think it was to Adobe, saying something like, we have a standing policy with our recruiters that we don't recruit from Adobe. It seems you have a different policy. One of us must change our policy. Please let me know who. Steve. And it was an email from Steve Jobs, basically saying, hey, you guys better stop poaching our people or we're going to start poaching yours.
And that was the smoking gun in a class action lawsuit against Apple and a number of other Silicon Valley companies for basically collusion and using that to suppress salaries. So, yep, it's a really nifty email, but don't do it at home, kids. Like, it's not a good idea. Collusion is bad.
Exactly. But I think this is related to the previous topic as well, though, Yaniv, right? Which is Meta can't buy OpenAI. They can't get those assets. They can't, make the investors and company whole. And they have to try to dismantle OpenAI, one employee at a time, or at least get some of its best assets. And so it's not a direct correlation. It's not as aggressive as buying 49% and all this sort of stuff. But it is this sort of like trying to find some way through the window, through the roof, through the chimney to try to get access to these incredibly valuable resources that are very rare in the world.
And, I would say if you are a young, talented, technical person, this is a very rare historic opportunity to massively upskill yourself to a skill set that for at least the next few years is exceptionally lucrative, exceptionally in demand. So never been a better time, right? Like as a young software engineer, as a young computer science researcher, to look and see that there are people earning $100 million for their skills, it's kind of crazy. You could say it's sick, but you could also say it's sort of inspiring. Like why should it be the bankers who earn the big bucks? Why shouldn't it be the incredibly talented researchers who are bringing the frontiers of technology forward? It's a rare time in history, and I think folks should take advantage of that. Those are our thoughts on Meta and AI. What do you think? Join us in the comments to let us know, how desperate do you think these guys are? Do you think they can catch up? And what would you do for $100 million?
Let's move on to our third major topic, Existential Corner, where we want to talk about Sam Altman's new blog post about a week ago as of recording, titled The Gentle Singularity. So let me maybe include a few quotes here from the post that I thought were most interesting, and then we can react to the general sentiments shared. How about that? The first quote is, my belief is that we are heading toward a world where intelligence is going to be extremely abundant, and the cost of intelligence and energy, ideas, and the ability to make those ideas happen will fall exponentially. I hope we can transition to a world with a gentle singularity where the future turns out surprisingly well and the rate of change is manageable by our institutions. It's an interesting takeaway there. He hopes that the rate of change is manageable and our institutions can keep up. But evidence to the contrary just in the last 10 or 15 years, just with the advent of social media and the internet. So I don't know if AI is going to be any better.
Well, here's my takeaway from this, Chris. If you've been on LinkedIn any amount lately, you'll know that people say one of the big tells that text was written by AI is the inclusion of M dashes, those long dashes to break up a sentence. And I noticed that Sam's quote has a couple of M dashes in it, which leads me to the conclusion that Sam Altman didn't write this at all. Sam Altman's dead and has been replaced by an LLM.
All right, now you're just saying shit for the cold open.
M dashes, man. Humans have never written M dashes. What's my actual thought on this? Sure. I think putting the term gentle in front of singularity is kind of hilarious. It's a bit like putting the word gentle in front of nuclear weapon or something. It's like, sure, it doesn't really change. It's still the singularity, which is the acceleration of progress to a point where it's infinite. I don't think humans come out of that well, and calling it gentle doesn't really change that fact.
Yeah, it's like clean coal or something, right? A singularity is going to spaghettify your body and smash you into a million pieces and consume all light and energy. But it's okay. It's going to be gentle.
It's like we're making empathetic nukes.
this is going to be embarrassing for everybody, but my brother is 10 years younger than me, so I sort of like I was conscious and sort of helping to raise him. And when he was really young, he would try to bend my mother's finger all the way back just to see what would happen. And my mom would say, "Hey, Mitch, you're hurting me." And he would say, "But I'm doing it slowly." And this reminds me of Sam Altman. He's like, we're gonna hurt you a lot, but don't worry, we'll be gentle.
And I hear your brother's actually one of the top guys in prison now, doing very well for himself.
He murders people gently. All right. The next insight here is, or the next quote rather, is, in some big sense, ChatGPT is already more powerful than any human who has ever lived. Look, I'm starting to wonder, in some ways and to some degrees, is Sam's hype getting ahead of the curve? Like, to what degree is he getting ahead of his skis, or is he going to Congress and saying, you should regulate us, this is the most powerful thing in the history of the world? To what degree is this just like him hyping up the value of his business and his creation? Because, we've talked multiple times on this show about the limits of these LLMs, and including this episode, right? They lack first principles thinking, they lack critical challenging of the audience, they really need a lot of context, they struggle to maintain context windows. Look, if you ask them the exact right question, the exact right way, for the exact right use case, they are amongst the smartest people in the history of the world. And I've believed that, hook, line, and sinker since the beginning. I'm just worried about, where is the diminishing returns here, where we're starting to experience this uncanny valley. And I'm starting to see the cracks in the cracks in the walls. It seems to me that we're going to need to see some fundamental changes for these things to be truly useful in truly deep, challenging domains where shit can't be sort of, doing some copywriting.
I think maybe you've swung a little too far there, Chris. I think the technology is pretty amazing and is already very impactful. But yeah, look, the quote's a funny one. In some sense, ChatGPT is already more powerful than any human who has ever lived. In some sense, so is my lawnmower. That thing can cut grass like no man with a machete ever. Now, okay, so I'm being glib. Maybe it's the end of a long episode and I'm being a bit like that. But yeah, it's absolutely true. It has more knowledge. It has more cognitive capacity. It can think faster. It can write faster than any human in history. It's incredible. But it's, I guess what my point is, it's a fairly meaningless statement because computers have had these exceptional powers for a long time. So the question is more, in what sense is it more powerful? And yeah, in some ways, here's what I think, which is a slightly different take than what Sam's written, is that ChatGPT is more capable than the median human at most cognitive tasks, which is quite a different statement, but I actually think it's closer to being true. And it has some really interesting implications for how AI gets used and for society, right? I believe that the smartest people, even maybe the smartest 10% of people in any given domain, can probably outthink ChatGPT, outwrite ChatGPT, outcode ChatGPT, outmath ChatGPT. But the 50th percentile of humans in any of those things is much worse at that than ChatGPT. And so when you've got someone who's above average at everything, but maybe not necessarily exceptional at that many things, what are the uses to which you put that tool? And of course, it is exactly where we see AI really having a huge impact, which is in removing a lot of more menial or entry-level white-collar work. That is something that it is really, really good at. Is it more powerful than any human? Well, depends on your definition.
I think that's a better construction of the concept that he's trying to share. And it's much more, sophisticated and nuanced, but than he's allowing for in this particular quote.
I'm more sophisticated and nuanced than Sam Altman, motherfuckers. Take that.
There you go. And if that quote taken alone is also bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, related to that quote, he's saying, in 2026, we will likely see the arrival of systems that can figure out novel insights. Now, again, there is this tension that I'm experiencing, that I'm feeling in my brain. These things are brilliant. They're the dumbest they're ever going to be right now. They're becoming exponentially better, and it's only a matter of time until all these weaknesses are solved. And on the other hand, I'm feeling like even with 4.0 and 0.3 and 0.3 mini, I am still seeing the limitations of these models. in the ways we've discussed. And I'm wondering where the singularity, whether we can cross that singularity, where there is this diminishing returns with more and more and more data, and it never quite gets to the place where we're developing what we hope we can develop, this novel insights or true intuition, where it can read between the lines and solve for the human prompting problem. I'm not saying either of those things are true. I'm saying I'm starting to develop some tension in my mind about those two realities. He's saying 2026, we're going to start seeing arrival of systems that figure out novel insights. And by novel insights, I assume he means new ways about thinking about geopolitics or material science or physics or healthcare or whatever, power generation, and that we will start to see some real benefits to humanity beyond productivity gains. And I'm excited about that possibility. I'm rooting for it, and I hope that's true. Okay, the next insight that he has is that we will see in 2027 the arrival of robots that can do tasks in the real world. I imagine he means, general availability of these robots that can do generally useful tasks in the world, because of course we already see some robots doing tasks in labs and in pilot programs. But he's saying 2027 that'll become commonplace. And then the final insight that I've pulled out here is perhaps the best path forward, I'm quoting him now, will be something like solve the alignment problem well enough, and then number 2, focus on making superintelligence cheap, widely available, and not too concentrated. And I think reading between the lines here, what he's saying is we shouldn't spend forever and a day trying to solve the alignment problem perfectly. We just need to solve it well enough, and then just double down, triple down on superintelligence and making that real, cheap, and widely available. And if I had to bet, it's that attitude that saw some of OpenAI's most high-profile departures, where he's sort of saying, guys, we don't need to solve or spend all our days on alignment. It just has to be good enough, and we just have to keep up with the power of the product. We need to make this product commercially viable, useful, and accelerate towards superintelligence at the same time.
I'm getting really strong Terminator 2 vibes from this whole article, right? Which is like, the whole storyline where they have to blow up that Dyson Corp because they're busy making Terminators, and they're all good people who, just want to build cool tech and probably make a bunch of money doing it, and then they let this uncontained robot intelligence take over the planet. And this is Sam Altman, who has a very strong interest in promoting superintelligence, saying, oh, well, just has to be good enough, and then, we'll put it in all our killer robots, but they'll be pretty aligned, so it'll be fine. I guess what I'd say is these are very self-serving arguments. It doesn't mean that they are wrong, but it's sort of hard, it's hard to differentiate these arguments from, I guess, corporate publicity that is in the interest of OpenAI, which makes me feel that there's a certain amount of, I guess, intellectual compromise in there, that it's not an argument for its own sake. It's more like trying to win a debate than have a really honest intellectual discussion or sort of insight.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to note on this from my point of view. Number one, if you realize this was written on his personal site, not on the corporate site, and his personal site is, powered by this thing called Posthaven, I guess, and it's very, very simple. It's not adorned by any, anything very corporate-y. It actually looks a lot like Paul Graham's site, like just almost, I would say, not by accident. And it's this kind of very humble, very stripped down thing, and it's not a corporate blog. It's not an official statement from OpenAI. So it's a very interesting way, as you say, Yaniv, of laying cognitive track without making it an official statement from the company. And so that, I don't think that's an accident, as you say. I think this is self-serving, and it's definitely, at the very least, intellectually compromised. I think the most skeptical or most unfair thing you could say about Sam Altman during this journey so far, whether it was calculated or not, you be the judge, is he came out with ChatGPT. It had a ChatGPT moment. It, exploded based on how interesting and novel it was. And then he proceeded to tell the world, tell governments, this is the most powerful, dangerous technology in the history of the world. So much so that you need to pre-regulate it, or you need to start thinking about regulating us. We are now at risk of becoming the masters of the universe and changing the face of society. And that had the benefit of putting Sam and his company at the center of the universe, right? Because he declared it dangerous. And now he's like, chill out, guys. It's all good. I think it's going to be a gentle singularity, and I think we've got this, and we don't have to overthink the alignment problem, and let's race towards superintelligence. And again, I'm not saying this was pre-planned, but the most ungenerous thing you could say is he got all the attention, all the money, all the focus, all the centrality, and then he's like, but don't worry, you can trust me. And I do think this is not a solved problem, and we do need to maintain a little skepticism, a little fear, and a lot of pragmatism and concern as we go along this journey.
I absolutely agree with that, Chris. It's a fascinating time, but let's not be caught in the thrall of Sam Altman's silky words and come to our own conclusions.
All right, those are our thoughts on Sam Altman's posts and the impending AI apocalypse. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you think it's going to be a gentle singularity, or do you think this is corporate doublespeak for don't worry, just trust us? We'll join you down there for a discussion. Well, that is the pod. We covered the big topics of the day, of the week, particularly around AI in the workplace, Meta and AI trying to catch up, and Existential Corner with Sam Altman's post. Let us know what you think about all these topics and much more down in the comments. We'd love to join you there. Otherwise, Yaniv, how can people find you on the internet?
I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. I got one just this morning from someone who said he was an avid listener. I don't think anyone has said they're an avid anything of me in the past, so it was wonderful. Yep, always happy to get a request. Let me know you're from TSP and I will accept it. How about you, Chris?
You can do the same for me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad or on my site, chrissaad.com, or subscribe to my newsletter at chrissaad.com/newsletter. All right, Nev, catch you in the next one.
All right, that's the pod.